Okay, imagine this scene for a second. It's January 1935, a really bitter cold night in New York City.
Right in the thick of the Great Depression.
Exactly. 20% unemployment in the city, people getting relief checks. And yet, the grand ballroom of the Hotel Pennsylvania, it's completely jammed.
Packed to the rafters. And not for, Benny Goodman or some movie star.
No, it was for something advertised in the paper. Something called Learn to Speak Effectively, Prepare for Leadership. Kind of dry sounding.
Very dry. But the source material, it really emphasizes who is in that crowd. 2,500 people, every single seat taken.
And hundreds more standing. For an hour and a half.
Yeah, and these weren't just random folks. The sources say they were from the upper economic strata, executives, employers, professionals.
People you'd think already had it made.
Yeah.
Sort of successful, busy people. Why were they there, especially then?
Well, and that's the interesting part. You might think, oh, depression, desperation, right. But this course, this specific training, it had already been huge for 24 years before this night.
Wow, 24 years.
Yeah, over 15,000 people had apparently already taken it. Even people inside big conservative companies, Westinghouse Electric, McGraw-Hill, the New York Telephone Company.
So the demand wasn't just a blip caused by hard times. It points to something deeper, something missing.
It really does. And this connects directly to a big survey the sources talk about, done by places like the University of Chicago, the American Association for Adult Education.
Okay.
What were they asking? They asked adults what they actually wanted to study. What were their real interests? Number one was health. Makes sense.
Sure.
But number two, it was developing skill in human relationships, how to get along with people, how to influence them.
And not just theory, right?
No, definitely not. The survey showed people wanted practical, nuts and bolts suggestions, things they could use tomorrow at work or socially or even at home. Not high-flown psychology jargons.
They wanted a toolkit.
Pretty much. And here's the kicker, the big gap the survey uncovered. Libraries back then, full of dense scholarly books on like ancient Greek or Latin or advanced math.
Stuff the average person wasn't exactly using day to day.
Right. But on the topic they most cared about for daily life, human interaction, communication there was, well, basically nothing. No practical how-to manual.
And that explains the packed ballroom, doesn't it?
Yeah.
According to these sources, anyway.
That's the argument. These successful people, they'd maybe gone through formal schooling, got the degrees.
Thought knowledge was enough.
Yeah, but then out in the real world, they hit a wall. They realized that knowing stuff wasn't the same as being able to, communicate it effectively, to connect, persuade, lead. That skill was missing.
And maybe even more important than the diploma sometimes, they were hungry for that practical guide.
Exactly. So that's what we're diving into today, the sources that really lay out this whole picture, that surprising scene, what it meant, the kind of changes people experienced, and the story behind the person and the method designed to fill that exact gap.
Okay, so back to the Hotel Pennsylvania ballroom. The ad promised entertainment, which seems odd for a speaking course.
It does, but it was a different kind of show. Instead of one main speaker, they brought out 18 people who had actually finished the course.
18 people. Okay.
And the format was, well, intense. Each person got exactly 75 seconds. A gavel came down, bang, time's up. Next person.
75 seconds to tell their story. That's it.
That's it. The source says it moved like a herd of buffalo thundering across the plains, just relentless speed.
Wow. And people stood for an hour and a half watching this.
Apparently so. And the speakers were like a total cross-section. Sales guys, execs, bankers, but also a baker, a lawyer, a dentist. There was even a druggist who came all the way from Indianapolis just for this.
Indianapolis?
Yeah. And another lawyer mentioned came from Havana, Cuba, just to prep for one single 3-minute speech.
That's incredible commitment. So what were these 75-second stories like? Did the sources give examples?
Oh, yeah, that's where it gets really compelling. The sources highlight a few specific transformations. Take Patrick J. O'Hare.
Okay, O'Hare.
Irish immigrant, only had 4 years of schooling, worked as a mechanic, a chauffeur, then tried selling trucks. Total failure. He had this crushing inferiority complex, said it was eating his heart out. He'd literally have to pace back and forth outside a potential customer's office multiple times before he could force himself to go in.
Oh, man, that's painful. I think a lot of people can relate to that kind of fear.
Absolutely. His wife finally pushed him into the course, told him, God knows you need it. He was terrified, especially of college graduates. The source says he stood outside on the sidewalk for 5 whole minutes before he could make himself walk into the first class.
And when he first tried speaking.
He said he actually got dizzy with fear, just froze up.
But obviously something changed.
Dramatically. Week after week, they made him get up and talk. And being in a room with others just as scared, doing the same thing, it started chipping away at the fear. First, fear of audiences. Then fear of individuals, even his bosses.
He found his voice?
And then some. He discovered he actually enjoyed talking. He said the bigger the crowd, the better. And this confidence wasn't just in class. He started presenting his ideas at work. He got better at sales, became respected, liked.
So that night at the hotel.
He wasn't dizzy. He apparently told this gay, rollicking story. That's the quote that had the whole audience laughing. Compared him to a professional speaker. Total turnaround.
That's a powerful story. Who else?
And then there's Godfrey Meyer. Older guy, gray-haired banker, father of 11, lived quietly in Clifton, New Jersey for like 25 years. Knew maybe 500 people. Zero community involvement.
Okay, sounds like a pretty reserved life.
Extremely. And his first time speaking in the class, the source says he was struck dumb. Like his mind just completely blank. Couldn't function.
Oh, wow. So how did he turn it around?
It was actually anger that did it.
Sure.
An unfair tax bill in his town. Most people would just grumble at home, right?
Yeah, probably.
But because of the course, his new instinct was different. He went down to the town meeting and, as Lee put it, blew off steam in public. Just let them have it.
Ah, and what happened?
People were stunned but impressed. So impressed they actually urged him to run for town council.
Seriously, from being struck dumb to running for office.
Exactly. He campaigned, spoke out against government waste, and when the election happened, get this, 96 candidates ran.
86.
And Godfrey Meyer, the quiet banker, got the most votes, topped the whole list.
No way.
Yeah. He went from knowing 500 people to being a public figure in a town of 40,000, almost overnight. He claimed he made 80 times more friends in 6 weeks than in the previous 25 years.
That's astounding.
And the source makes a point about the practical side, too. His councilman salary gave him 1,000% annual return on what he paid for the course. His story is framed as like Exhibit A for how leadership just naturally flows to people who can stand up and communicate.
It really shows the ripple effect, doesn't it? Beyond just giving a speech. Okay, one more.
Sure. There's the head of a big national food manufacturers association, a major executive.
Okay.
Before the course, he admitted he couldn't effectively stand up and express his ideas, even in his own board meetings. Just couldn't get his points across clearly.
So what changed for him?
He learned to think on his feet, as the source puts it, and the results were, well, huge for him and his company.
How so?
Well, first, he quickly became president of his entire national association. That meant speaking engagements all across the U.S.
Okay, that's big.
But second, parts of his speeches started getting picked up by the Associated Press, AP Wires, and then reprinted in newspapers and magazines nationwide.
Wow, free publicity.
Massive free publicity. The source claims that in just 2 years, he got more positive press for his company and its products for free than he'd previously gotten by spending $250,000 on advertising.
$250,000. Just from learning to speak better.
That's the claim. And it changed how people treated him, too. Those high-powered Manhattan executives who used to be hard to get meetings with, they started calling him, inviting him to lunch, apologizing for taking up his time.
That whole dynamic shifted.
Completely.
Yeah.
And these stories, they all lead up to this explicit statement in the source material. It says, quote, "The ability to speak is a shortcut to distinction."
A shortcut to distinction.
Yeah. It puts a person in the limelight, raises one head and shoulders above the crowd, and the person who can speak acceptably is usually given credit for an ability out of all proportion to what he or she really possesses.
That last part is interesting. Given credit for more ability than they might actually have, just because they can communicate well.
It's a powerful idea, right? That communication isn't just about clarity, it's about perception and influence. And the guy behind all this, the architect of the system, creating these results, was Dale Carnegie.
Dale Carnegie. Okay, the name everyone knows.
Right. The source calls him the most spectacular force in this whole adult education movement that was happening. His influence was apparently huge.
You mentioned the Ripley's Believe It or Not thing?
Yeah, the claim he'd criticized 150,000 speeches. It sounds unbelievable. But the source puts it in perspective. It's like listening to a speech almost every single day since Columbus landed.
We're listening nonstop, day and night, for 10 months straight if each speech was just 3 minutes long.
Yeah.
That's a lot of speeches.
It's staggering. And Carnegie's own background, his personal story, as told in the sources, it kind of feels like it perfectly set him up to understand the people he ended up teaching, like Patrick O'Hare, like Godfrey Meyer.
How so? Where did he come from?
Super humble beginnings, born on a farm in Missouri, miles from the nearest railroad, didn't even see a streetcar till he was 12.
Wow. Quite a contrast to where he ended up traveling the world.
Totally. Hong Kong to Hammerfest, near the North Pole, the source says.
Yeah.
This is a guy who started out picking strawberries for pennies an hour.
And cutting cockleburrs, yeah.
Yeah.
5 cents an hour.
Right. Became this high-paid trainer for top executives. He was a cowboy, punched cattle, rode fences, and later put on shows in London with royal patrons watching.
Quite the journey. And he struggled with speaking himself initially.
Oh, massively. He admitted he was a total failure the first half dozen times he tried it. Even Lowell Thomas, the famous broadcaster, gave Carnegie credit for helping him succeed. Carnegie knew that fear firsthand.
Because he lived it.
Absolutely. The source paints a picture of real hardship on that farm. Hard luck always battering, it says. Floods wiping out crops, cholera killing hogs, markets collapsing, always worried about the bank foreclosing.
So getting an education must have been tough.
Incredibly tough. They moved near a teacher's college, but he couldn't afford the $1-a-day room and board. So he rode a horse 3 miles each way every day.
3 miles on horseback.
Yeah, milking cows, cutting wood, feeding hogs, studying Latin verbs by a dim coal oil lamp until his eyes blurred, setting his alarm for 3 a.m. to go feed the pedigree pigs before riding off to class.
Wow, that's dedication.
And it came with a cost. He felt deeply ashamed of their poverty, riding back to milk the cows while other students socialized. Embarrassed by his clothes, a coat too tight, trousers too short, he felt inferior.
So he was looking for a way out, a way to stand out.
Desperately, a shortcut to distinction, just like he later said speaking provided. He saw the influential groups in college, the athletes, the debaters, the speakers. He had no athletic skills, so he went for speaking.
And he threw himself into it.
Completely. Spent months preparing for contests, practiced constantly while riding his horse, while milking cows, even apparently giving speeches to pigeons in the hayloft.
Haranguing pigeons. I love that image.
Me too. But despite all that work, he kept losing. Defeat after defeat in the speaking competitions.
That must have been crushing for him, given how much he wanted it.
It was devastating. The source says he was 18, sensitive, proud, and he got so discouraged he actually considered suicide.
Wow. That really highlights how deep his struggle went.
It does. But then something clicked. Suddenly, he started winning. Not just one contest, but every contest he entered.
What changed, did the source say?
It doesn't detail the exact aha moment, but the results were dramatic. And then, just like what would happen in his courses later, other students saw him winning and asked him for help. He started coaching them.
And they started winning too.
Exactly. The pattern was set early on.
But he didn't go straight into teaching after college, did he?
No, not at all. More struggles first. Tried selling correspondence courses out in the Nebraska and Wyoming sandhills. Failed miserably. Got so desperate, the source says he just wept in his hotel room in Alliance, Nebraska.
Oh, man. Sounds like rock bottom.
Pretty close. He ended up hitchhiking on a freight train to get to Omaha. Had to feed wild horses along the way to basically pay for his passage.
Feeding wild horses for a train ride? Seriously?
That's the story. Then he landed a sales job with Armour & Company, selling bacon, soap, lard. Yeah, in the Badlands and what the source calls cow and Indian country of western South Dakota. Rough territory. Covered it by freight train, stagecoach, horseback. Slept in pioneer hotels with just thin muslin walls between rooms.
Sounds like the Wild West.
Pretty much. But he learned sales the hard way, studied books on it, rode broncos, played poker with local Native Americans, figured out how to collect payments, sometimes taking shoes off a store shelf if they didn't have cash.
Resourceful.
And energetic. Riding those freight trains 100 miles a day, jumping off at stops, dashing in to get orders, then sprinting to swing back onto the moving train.
That takes guts. Was he any good at it?
Unbelievably good.
Yeah.
He took a territory that was ranked 25th out of 29, totally unproductive, and in 2 years he made it #1.
#1. So Armour must have loved him.
They did, offered him a big promotion, but he turned it down.
Why?
He wanted something else. Went to New York City, studied acting at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. He'd even toured the country as an actor for a while.
An actor? I didn't know that.
Yeah, but he was realistic. He figured out he wasn't going to be a huge star. You know, a Booth or a Barrymore, as the source puts it.
So back to sales.
Briefly. Tried selling Packard automobiles, but his heart wasn't in it. He didn't know or care about machinery. He was miserable and really just wanted time to write the books he dreamed of writing.
So he quit again.
He did. And this time, he had a plan. He thought, okay, I need to support myself while I write. Maybe I can teach night classes.
And he thought back to his own education.
Exactly. He evaluated his college years and realized that the single most valuable thing he got out of it, the thing that gave him confidence, courage, poise, the ability to deal with people in business, wasn't Latin or math. It was the public speaking training.
The very thing he struggled with so much initially.
Right. So he went to the director of the YMCA schools in New York with an idea. Let me teach a practical public speaking course, specifically aimed at business people.
And how did the YMCA react?
They basically laughed at him. According to the source, they called the idea absurd, said they'd tried courses like that before, and they always failed. Nobody signed up.
So they turned him down.
They refused to pay him a salary, not even $2 a night, which was the standard rate then. Flat out, no.
Ouch. Most people would have walked away.
But Carnegie, well, he had that persistence, right? He made them a deal. Okay, he said, don't pay me a salary. Let me teach it purely on commission. I'll take a percentage of the net profits if there are any.
Wow, that's betting on yourself.
Big time. And it paid off spectacularly. Within 3 years, teaching on that risky commission basis, he was earning $30 a night.
15 times the standard rate.
Exactly. The demand was obviously huge. The course just took off like a rocket, spread to other YMCAs, then other cities, Philadelphia, Baltimore, eventually London, Paris.
And he needed teaching materials.
They did.
Cool.
The existing textbooks on public speaking were apparently way too academic, too theoretical, not useful for the actual business people flocking to his classes.
He had to write his own.
Had to. And that became his first major book, Public Speaking and Influencing Men in Business.
And that book became pretty influential itself.
Hugely. Became the official textbook not just for the YMCAs across the country, but for big groups like the American Bankers Association and the National Credit Men's Association.
So major organizations recognized that this practical skill was essential for professionals.
Absolutely. It validated the whole approach.
What was his core teaching philosophy then? What made it work so well?
It seems really grounded in his own experience. His core belief was, look, anyone can talk when they're really mad. Like if someone slugs you on the jaw, you'll find words.
Okay.
Or you can talk if you have self-confidence and if you have an idea that's just boiling inside you, something you desperately want to communicate.
So it's about emotion and confidence. How do you build the confidence part?
His famous line captures it. Do the thing you fear to do and get a record of successful experiences behind you. Action cures fear.
Get runs on the board, basically.
Exactly. So his method was built around that. He forced every single person in the class to get up and talk at every single session. No exceptions.
Every section. That sounds terrifying.
Probably was at first. But the key was the audience. Everyone else in the room was in the same boat, just as nervous. It created a sympathetic environment.
Less judgment.
Right. And just doing it over and over, week after week, that constant practice, it built courage. It built confidence. It built enthusiasm. And that feeling started carrying over into their lives outside the classroom.
It wasn't just about making speeches then.
No, the source suggests Carnegie saw that as almost incidental. He felt his real mission, what he was actually getting paid for, wasn't teaching rhetoric. It was helping people conquer their fears and develop the courage to interact effectively with others.
And the course kept evolving.
It had to, because his students weren't typical college kids. They were busy adults, business people, professional men and women. Many hadn't been inside a school in decades.
And they were paying for results.
Right. Often paying in installments. They weren't interested in theory they might use someday. They wanted something practical, something concrete they could apply the next day in a sales meeting, at a board presentation, handling a difficult employee.
That pressure must have shaped the course.
Absolutely. It forced Carnegie to keep it swift, practical, results-oriented, no fluff, just tools and practice.
So what did the system end up being? A mix of things.
Yeah, the sources describe it as this unique blend. Part public speaking technique, sure, but also part salesmanship, part human relations, part practical applied psychology.
Not academic at all.
Definitely not. One description quoted is that it was as real as the measles and twice as much fun. It was about getting out of your own head and actually connecting with people in a real-world way.
And it clearly stuck with people.
Amazingly so. Graduates formed their own clubs just to keep practicing and stay connected. Some of these clubs met regularly for years. There was one group in Philadelphia that apparently met twice a month for 17 years straight.
17 years? Wow.
Yeah. And remember those people traveling huge distances? 50 miles, 100 miles each way for class. One person mentioned commuted weekly from Chicago to New York.
Chicago to New York every week for a night class.
That's what the source claims. It just shows the incredible value people felt they were getting.
It really connects to that idea from William James, the psychologist.
Right. Professor James's idea that the average person only uses about 10% of their latent mental ability.
The suggestion here is that Carnegie's methods were tapping into that other 90%, helping people unlock potential they didn't even know they had.
That seems to be the implication. Helping ordinary people develop these often overlooked capabilities, which is why it became such a significant movement in adult education.
And it wasn't just the speaking course, right? The institution he founded branched out.
Yeah, they developed other courses, wrote other books addressing similar practical needs, a sales course, a management seminar, even the famous How to Stop Worrying and Start Living book, all focused on applied psychology and human interaction skills.
So wrapping this up, looking back at our deep dive into these sources,
Yeah.
it paints a really striking picture. We started with that almost unbelievable scene in the hotel ballroom in 1935.
Yeah, that packed room, middle of the Depression, full of successful people desperate for something specific.
It was like a snapshot of this huge, unmet need for practical skills in, well, just dealing with people. Communication, connection, stuff that formal education just wasn't providing.
And we saw the incredible impact this kind of training could have. The specific stories Patrick O'Hare overcoming that crippling fear.
Godfrey Meyer, the quiet banker turned public leader.
The food executive getting massive free publicity. They all show how developing these communication skills really did seem to function as that shortcut to distinction the source talked about. Shortcut to influence, to success.
And then there's the story of Dale Carnegie himself.
Yeah.
His whole life journey, really. From poverty and intense shyness.
Yeah, the struggles with failure, the persistence.
It all seemed to forge the methods he ended up teaching. His system wasn't academic theory. It came from understanding, firsthand, what people feared and what they needed to overcome it.
Right. He knew what that hunger for confidence and connection felt like because he'd felt it so deeply himself.
The sources make it pretty clear, don't they? In the real world, back then at least, being able to speak effectively, persuade, connect with others, it wasn't just a soft skill. It was seen as absolutely fundamental for leadership and getting ahead.
Undeniably, it was a core competency.
Which kind of brings us to the final thought for you listening today. We've looked at these sources from almost a century ago, revealing this intense demand for practical human relationship skills. So what does this history tell you about the skills that matter most now, navigating business and life today?
Are those abilities people were so desperate for back in 1935, effective communication, influence, connection, are they still the things that give people that critical edge, that shortcut to distinction?
Or have things changed? And thinking about your own life, what capabilities might you need to focus on developing to maybe unlock some of that latent potential William James talked about? Something to think about.